The concept of democracy and good governance in Africa continues to be quite elusive. We have seen countries that are said to be democratic and are seemingly doing okay. We have also seen countries that are not really democratic and they are somewhere in there trying by all means to make sure they keep afloat. And we have countries like our own that continues to float within the non-free nations that are considered not democratic. This is according to the book Democracy Works that was penned by 4 gentlemen. Today we sit down with one of the gentlemen, Hon Tendai Biti, here in Zimbabwe. He's the former finance minister of in Zimbabwe. So we want to hear what he thinks. We also want to unpack the state of our economy in Zimbabwe today and whether we are out of the tunnel as yet, as is being claimed by the government. We have been told that the GDP is going to hit 7.8%. We have been told the manufacturing sector is improving. We have been told the industries are reopening, and we have been told so many things. So we want to find out from those who are at the helm, those who are keenly following all that is happening in our country, to hear what exactly they have observed. Is what government is saying a true reflection of that which is on the ground? This is Frank Talk with me, Yvonne. Join me after this short break as I introduce to you our guest today. And this is Frank Talk. What is the cost of restoring versus ignoring the scourge? But we want to talk about the state of the labor as it is today. Do we still have a labor to talk about? Right, welcome back to Frank Talk with me, Yvonne. And today, like I've said, we have Honorable Tendai Biti, and he is going to give us an overview of what most of us Zimbabweans are going through on a daily basis, vis-a-vis what we hear on TV every day about where we are. So, Honorable Tendai Biti, welcome to Zimbabwe Daily.
Good morning, Yvonne.
Awesome. I want to just read a few things that I've seen coming through from the Confederation of Zimbabwe Industries. They say that the country's gross domestic product growth is expected to hit 7.8% by year end, slightly above earlier estimates of 7.4%. And they say this is mainly driven by the recovery in the agricultural sector that is set to grow by up to 34%. And they said there's a steady performance of the mining sector and noticeable recovery in the manufacturing sector, whose capacity utilization rose from 36% in 2019 to 47% in 2020 and 54% in 2021. According to your own assessments, I know you are very versed and interested in everything that has anything to do with the economy of our nation. Is our economy on a recovery path?
So there's a narrative out there which they are trying to sell to Zimbabweans, which is the narrative that the economy is on a growth path, the economy is on a recovery path, the economy is on a turnaround path, and that we are now in El Dorado. and it's a Sunday time, it's Father Christmas. That narrative collides very violently with the reality on the ground. The reality on the ground is that you have got an economy that is trapped by massive contradictions that need to be resolved and addressed by fundamental reforms, without which we cannot talk of growth in real terms, and growth that is sustainable, and growth that is inclusive, and growth that is shared by all and everyone. So when Mr. Mtuli and when bosses speak of growth, that growth has no relation at all with my Ezra in Otito, in Chendambuya, in Odzani, in Ngai, in Cholocho, or in Binga. It is meaningless. It is academic. When they speak of surpluses and boast about Zimbabwean dollar surpluses that are sitting to the credit of their accounts held at the Reserve Bank, it has no relationship with the ordinary men and women on the street. Now, this is the reality. The reality is that you have an ordinary average person, an average Zimbabwean, who is ravished and totally assaulted and emasculated by the total mismanagement of the foreign exchange and foreign currency issue. You have a teacher who, during the time of the government of national unit, was earning in real terms US $500 with Mr. Ngubesi Chaikanari and deception. He devalued that civil servant salary in February of 2019 through statutory instrument 33 of 2019 by a factor of over 400%. So if you were earning US $500, you are now effectively earning US $35. This also speaks to the pensioner. These pensioners, since 2009, have been making contributions in real US dollar terms. I have a client as a lawyer, Mr. Rasmus Paspanojka. He was working for Zimplats. He worked for Zimplats for over 15 years. Since 2009, he was contributing to a pension fund held with the Old Mutual. The policy stated that on retirement, he will be paid 2 times his annual salary, which translated to US $22,000. He was discharged on the 25th of August, 2018, but the Old Mutual only paid out to him in May of 2019. By that time, they paid to him 22,000 RTGS, which in present day parlance is less than $200. So this is a worker who is now sick and ill with a disease called pneumoconiosis. His pension, which was $22,000, which gives you a fair start, small as it is, but now it's less than $200. So pensioners have suffered. Businesses too are suffering, particularly those that are in the export sector, because they are now subsidizing everyone. They are now bringing in money which is taken by the Reserve Bank in the form of export surrender requirements. That money is then used to monetize the fictitious and rigged auction system introduced by the Reserve Bank in June of 2020. This rigged auction system has pumped in up until June of 2021. It has pumped in 2.7 billion US dollars, and it's going to increase because the demand now is around $60 million a week. But here is the fraud. Here is the fraud. The parallel market rate, as I'm talking to you right now, is 173. The official exchange rate is 1:82. So there's a premium of slightly over 100% between the auction rate and the black market rate. So what it means is that those who are well connected, the who is who of ZANU-PF, some people's children, special children, go and access the US dollar at the official auction rate, and 1:82. When they purchase that foreign currency, they go and flood 4th Street. So they've commodified the US dollar. And the auction system is now a vehicle of transferring wealth from the very poor to the very rich. Because a teacher who stays in Zimbabwe, who is now earning around $17,000, $22,000, to pay his rent for that one single room, the landlord wants $40 US in US dollars. To pay for certain things, government things for that matter, to pay for number plate, he requires US dollars. To pay for a passport for his daughter, he requires US dollars. To pay for certain drugs in pharmacies, he requires US dollars. So he has to take his small amount of money and go to 4th Street, where he is going to pay and buy the US dollar at 1:173. He then has to go into a supermarket, OK Bazaars, which although nominally is accepting Zimbabwean dollars, the price of tea and bread in that supermarket is already indexed on the black market rate. If he has got a small vehicle, a Honda Fit, he has to buy foreign currency on the parallel market in order to put fuel at a Zuva service station or a Secunda service station or a Puma service station. Now, if you go around, you will find that teacher, even the person staying in Borodale where I stay, he's putting $10 on the fuel pump. So without structural reform of the currency, you can't talk of any growth. And one of the contradictions that is arising is that we now have parallel economies. We have a parallel economy, which is the US dollar cash economy, that caters for everyone who is dealing with US dollars, which is the majority of Zimbabweans. All of us have got US dollars. I don't have. Then you have got the formal economy, which is officially trading in Zimbabwean dollars. Now, when you look at, I've looked at about 35 statements of banks and listed companies. They all say they're doing well. But here's the trick. All those results are expressed in Zimbabwean dollars. But Zimbabwean dollars is not the currency that is being used in this economy. The currency that is being used is the US dollar. So you have artificial growth rates, artificial company statements that are based on an artificial currency, the Zimbabwean dollar, when the reality out there is that everyone is dealing with the US dollars. So the bottom line then is that you've got a fictitious economy, a big lie that is pretending to speak in Zimbabwean dollars when the reality on the ground is that we are all trading and operating in US dollars. So that's lie number one. We need to sort out the currency fiction, go back to the regime of multiple currencies, remove export surrender requirements. Those who need the Zimbabwean dollar to continue operating for change, allow that Zimbabwean dollar to float. In other words, eliminate the auction system. If you don't do that, I can assure you, Yvonne, that by November of 2021, the parallel rate will reach 100. And it will have a premium of more than of more than 150%. That's crime number one. Crime number two is the total mistreatment of labor in the workforce and the pension year. You can't continue paying the Zimbabwean worker in RTGS, in the false currency called the Zimbabwean dollar, when the reality on the ground is that every price is indexed in US dollars or in local dollar, but at a foreign expiry market rate. You can't do that. So you are pauperizing workers. You are making workers poorer and poorer. There's no reason for a teacher to go to work. I almost cried when I saw the permanent secretary in the Ministry of Justice, in the Ministry of Education, boasting and being cynical that, well, we have 70% teachers who are going to work. Those that are not going should borrow in order to go to work. It was a cruel statement. But in its cruelty, it recognizes that for a teacher to spend 30 days going to work with the salary, the Zimbabwean salary that he or she is earning, he or she will actually end up in deficit.
Right.
So to protect his small income or a small income, it's better for her to just sit at home and not earn a salary. Now, when you now have a country with negative salaries, it's a total disaster. Negative salaries were seen in countries with hyperinflation, countries with stagflation, countries with the total collapse after the Second World War. So we saw this in Hungary, part of Eastern Europe, and so forth. We are seeing it in banana republics in Latin America, for instance, in Venezuela, at some stage in Argentina, at some stage in Chile, in some stage in Bolivia. So, so despite the myth of recovery, we actually have features of an economy that is seen post-war destruction. So for all intents and purposes, this is a post-war economy. And one of the things that characterize a post-war economy is arbitrage.
Right.
It's corruption. This economy can never move forward if you have got a ruling elite without ideas. If you have got a cabinet that thinks like Makorokoza, it thinks like Madzila, how do I make money very quickly without working? So you have got a head of state, you've got a cabinet that thinks like dealers. How do I make a quick money? So the fundamental problem with Zimbabwe becomes a crisis of leadership.
Right.
We've got a vacuous leadership that is extractive and predatory. This leadership has no precedent. We fought against President Robert Mugabe for 38 years, but we did not know that after him will come such a humongous disaster driven by three things alone. Number one, self-aggrandizement,
right.
Looting and looting and looting. I've described them before as roving bandits. Yeah, a roving bandit will steal the milk from the cow, but will also steal the cow itself. A stationary bandit will milk the milk. Out of 6 buckets of milk, you steal 4 and recognize that people also have to drink. So when you have roving bandits that are in charge, you have a problem. So for all intents and purposes, this is a disaster, a complete kakistocracy. So those like the World Bank, the IMF, the Confederation of Zimbabwe Industries, who talk about recovery,
right.
They must answer the following hard questions. Your data and statistics, what currency is it indexed? If it's indexed in Zimbabwean dollars, forget about it. It's a waste of time, it's a waste of money. 2, is it possible to have growth in Zimbabwe without resolving the foreign currency conundrum? I submit that it's not possible. Thirdly, is it possible to resolve the Zimbabwean crisis without resolving the pain and pandemic of corruption? I submit that it's not possible. Corruption is a tax on ordinary men and women. Corruption is a tax on the Wananchi. Corruption is a tax on citizens. And I reckon that under Emerson Mnangagwa, 80 cents of every dollar that we are receiving as Zimbabwe is going to private pockets.
Right.
And then finally, is it possible to have growth without actual structural reforms? A retrenchment of excessive ghost workers that are in the public service. I'm told there are now about 600,000 workers. The GNU was paying 236,000 workers, ghost workers. How is it possible without dealing to to move forward without structurally dealing with wage bill? Is it possible to structurally reform without dealing with the budget deficit? Mutuli complains of surpluses, but we know there are huge deficits which are being hidden in treasury bills, in command agriculture. Look at the audit reports of Mrs. Chiri. It's not possible to have reform unless you can eat what you are killing.
Right.
Mutuli is surviving by inflating income in Zim dollar. They are full of Zim dollars because of that 5% transaction tax and so forth. But that's not reform, it's artificial. Is it possible to reform, Yvonne, without dealing with the structural fundamental problem with Zimbabwe, which is the crisis of leadership, with a predatory leadership? We are run by hyenas. It's a kakistocratic state. Is it possible to lead and deal with Zimbabwe without dealing with the crisis of legitimacy? It is not possible. So those who are trying to put lipstick on a crocodile is not possible. Mascara melts under heat. Mascara is washed away in a storm. Zimbabwe is a permanent storm. So you can't move forward with Emerson Mnangagwa. You can't move forward with ZANU-PF. And the people of Zimbabwe, in Lotito, in Morewa, in Chendambuya, in Ngai, in Cholocho, understand what I'm talking about.
Right.
But they are suffering. Their children are suffering. We have put so much pressure on the diaspora. All our Hamas in the diaspora, all we are saying is, please send us money, please send us money. The diaspora remittances are increasing. They are now over $1 billion because the diaspora is literally subsidizing the working people of Zimbabwe.
Government is saying that there are shocks. There are shocks that the nation has had to endure. The issue of cholera when they just came in, the issue of Cyclone Idai, and now the COVID-19 pandemic, and still they were able to absorb these shocks due to the surpluses that Minister Mtuli is always talking about. And when you look at it, I know you have said so much, and you have really, torn to pieces just the things that government is telling to us, because the reality on the ground is in opposite direction with what is being said. But when you look at all the challenges that government says they've had to deal with, are they doing enough? Are they not trying at least to do something for the people?
So let's start with COVID. We argued very strongly that apart from dealing with the curve of the pandemic from a pathological point of view, from a doctor's point of view, you also had to flatten the economic curve, the poverty curve. So there are two curves that were in issue. The disease curve, which required vaccinations, use of sanitizers, use of masks, the construction of COVID centers. Remember when we started, we didn't even have, and we had to patch up the Wilkins Hospital, the infectious disease in Beatrice. Then we moved to Bulawayo and so forth. But we argued that the working people had to be protected. There had to be social safety nets.
Right.
And that the government should provide grants of $30 per week, $200 to cushion the people. They came up with a package of $18 billion to fight COVID, but none of that money reached the ordinary working people. I even went to the High Court representing poor working people to say, look, we keep hearing that there is money that is being given to poor people. The case is called Gumai Makoka. Gumai Makoka was the applicant. But where is the money? So people died, and people are still dying. And we're exposed, by the way, by the third wave.
Right.
The third wave exposed Zimbabwe, and people died. Even though in gross terms, our numbers were low compared to the region of sub-Saharan Africa. But the death rate of Zimbabwe was actually the highest in Southern Africa. The death rate, the number of people dying per population to COVID was actually high. We did very badly
in terms of protecting the people. Okay.
In terms of protecting the people.
Right.
And part of the challenge as well is that the statistics were not reliable. I have several relatives and friends that actually died of COVID, but they didn't allow the post-mortem report to to write COVID. To write COVID, they didn't allow that. And what they then, but the actual burial, we were asked to observe COVID protocols.
Right.
So not many people were allowed. We're not allowed to do, body viewing. And I'm talking about things that I witnessed and went through, because I lost a lot of friends and relatives. May their soul rest in peace. So the bottom line is that so I was talking about the vaccines.
Mm-hmm.
Zimbabwe has used Sinopharm and Sinovac. But Sinopharm and Sinovac have not coped well with the third wave. Everywhere and anywhere where it has been used, which is why in China itself, China is now purchasing Pfizer. And I've also seen indications that government is now applied to use Johnson and Johnson, vaccine. It's very regrettable that they didn't join the WHO COVAX program, which would have given them sufficient funds. But the bottom line is in sufficient drugs. The bottom line is that all these crises, COVID, Cyclone Idai, have been avenues for looting.
Okay.
Have been avenues for looting. Cyclone Idai alone, the Auditor General is audited. $89 million was stolen. Using that. And if you go to those communities, they will tell you, yes, they came, we were on television, but nothing much is on the ground.
Right.
People, when government fail, people withdraw and they tend to self-help.
Right.
They withdraw and look after themselves. They dissociate from the government. They write off the government. So the average Zimbabwean is written off the government.
Right.
He or she fends for himself. So people will look for their relatives in the diaspora. People will go to Ngangas. People will go to the church. So you see these increased levels of disengagement between the government and the state. So I run this law firm. 90% of my overheads are in US dollars. But I don't get the US dollar from official markets. This law firm fends for itself. That is what essentially every Zimbabwean is doing. I used to call it kukia kia. People are just surviving because they've totally withdrawn from the government, except if you are related to ZANU-PF. Because if you are related to ZANU-PF, then you've become a client of ZANU-PF. And the state and the ZANU-PF government creates this dependence on it. So if you're a farmer, you're going to wait for inputs from Command Agriculture,
right,
or inputs from the presidential scheme. Yet you've been farming for over 20 years.
Right.
You've nothing to show for it. So you've essentially become a client of the regime. And the regime will harvest from you when it demands a vote from you in 2023 or in 2018. So in a fragile state, the ordinary average person withdraws, but there are a few who remain clients of the state. And that is what you are seeing in Zimbabwe. So if you go to Venezuela, for instance, Venezuela is just like Zimbabwe. There's a huge chunk of people that just wait for handouts from Mr. Maduro, who are clients. And dependence creates a clientelism. So for all intents and purposes, this is a client state. For all intents and purposes, given the huge levels of corruption, this is a deep state. And critically, how do we deal with the deep state? Critically, how do we deal with the kakistocratic state? Critically, how do we deal with the failed state?
Right.
That's the challenge on Zimbabweans.
The challenge of Zimbabwe. And I want to move to the banking sector before we come back and tie all these issues. And this is Frank Talk. What is the cost of restoring versus ignoring the scourge? But we want to talk about the state of the labor
as it is today? Do we still have a labor to talk about?
We want to talk about the banking sector. People have lost faith in the banking sector, maybe largely because people are trading in the US dollar, and the bank system, people don't really trust it. Now, when we look at our banking system, do we have a system that we can talk about in Zimbabwe?
Yes, we have banks. And, by and large, we actually have very decent banks.
Right.
Very decent banks in terms of trust. But the macroeconomic environment that these banks are operating is impossible. So one of the biggest crimes with our banking system is that there is no savings. If you put your money today, 3 months later, they want more. But the savings culture is not a function of the banks themselves. It's a function of the macroeconomic environment. Mm-hmm. And if the macroeconomic environment is high inflation, they can give you interest because money is being devalued by the day. Another distortion is bank charges. Bank charges are too high. Mm. If you look at the results of all banks, and I've read virtually all of them, their bank statements, they've made substantial profits.
From bank charges, right?
They're making money from bank charges. Mm. A bank is supposed to make money from selling money.
Right.
But they're not making money from selling money, from lending. They're making money from just holding accounts. And that is the most unfortunate. Transaction charges, they're huge. Spend a small bit of money, $40,000 RTGS, you're charged $2,000 so 2,000 bond notes and so forth. So the regulator is failing. But the banks will have to say to the regulator, but you want us, how do we survive?
Right.
Because part of the thing that is happening right now is that there's hot money that comes in and goes out.
Right. And
banks know that they are intermediating in the paro market. Because Eco Cash was killed by this regime. Mm-hmm. So the black market is no longer operating through Eco Cash. It's now operating through the banking system.
Right.
So huge amounts of monies are being transferred. And banks are aware. So banks are now putting huge charges. Because that's the only way they can react to a predatory situation. And what is the cause of that problem? It is the macroeconomic environment. What is the cause of that problem? It is what I've alluded to before,
right.
The mismanagement of the foreign exchange system in Zimbabwe. Scrap SI 33 of 2019. Scrap SI 142 of 2019. Scrap Starter Instrument 127 of 2021. Bring back a regime of multiple currencies. Maintain your Zimbabwean dollars because you are nationalistic, but liberalize that Zimbabwean, dollar. And for Christ's sake, stop stealing. Because part of the problem is that the economy is paying a price.
Right.
The economy is paying rent to the thieves. And if you want to see your rent, look at the Lamborghinis, the Ferraris that are being driven in Harare. Look at the mansions that they are constructing. It's obscene. It's obscene. Look at the number of private schools that are emerging. Look at the private boats that they're buying in Kariba. That is all rent someone has to pay. And unfortunately, it is the poor working people of Zimbabwe who are carrying the burden of the bohemian consumerism that we are seeing in Zimbabwe.
All right, we are talking to Honorable Tendai Biti on the state of the economy in Zimbabwe and how a democratic state would do things differently. And I think you've been following in terms of the issues that have been raised. Feel free to also send in your contributions. What is your own experience? Indeed, many people have chosen to look after themselves. Like we've rightly said, private schools are now sprouting, and that's largely because the public space is failing to give the children the kind of education that they need. And there's a huge gap that we are experiencing as a people in almost all the sectors of our life. Now, when we when we look at all of this that is happening, how do we get to a stage where government comes down to the level of the people and really appreciate the daily struggles they go through just to get money? Because we have a situation where government comes and say, we are making a profit, we have a surplus which helped to buy the vaccines. So when you ask about the surplus, think about the vaccine that is on your arm. We have a government that is telling us that we are making profits, and yet we have a people who cannot afford a proper meal in a day. How do we balance the two? I know a lot of people are saying register to vote and what, but is registering to vote and actually voting on the day going to change the way we are leading our lives right now?
So the other thing that you're also seeing an increase in, you've spoken about an increase in private schools. Look also at the increase in private clinics and private hospitals. Here in Milton Park alone, we probably have 10 or 15 new medical centers, private clinics, and so forth. There's a clinic owned by Kudata Gwirei called Arendo Clinic. It's essentially taking over even public hospitals. If you go to Parenatwa right now, they've taken most of the sea floor, the third floor. So there is privatization of public institutions, the health delivery system, the public transportation system, ZUPCO.
Yeah.
ZUPCO has been taken over by Kudata Gwirei. ZUPCO has been taken over by cartels in Zimbabwe. It has been privatized. But not just ZUPCO, even ordinary public transport that we grew up using.
Right.
We grew up using chicken buses. We grew up going into Mcheche bus service, going into Kukurakurerwa, going into Tumpsi services. All those are now being told operate through ZUPCO. Yeah. But who is ZUPCO? ZUPCO is Kudata Gwirei. So it's a dangerous state. It's a deep state. It's not just the transport sector which has also been privatized. What about mining, the gold sector? 11 mines were given to Kudata Gwirei. Mines like Elvington, mine, Red Wing, and so forth. And they've created this vehicle called Kuvimba. That same Kuvimba is now taken over. They've privatized Fidelity Gold Refinery. The country's sole refinery, they take, somebody just wakes up and say, we're giving it to Kudata Gwirei. As I'm talking to you right now, they're desperately trying to take over First Mutual Life. First Mutual Assurance is the second biggest assurance company in Zimbabwe after the Old Mutual Life Assurance. And in terms of asset base, it is only second to the Old Mutual. Now they're taking it over. You have read that they want to collapse CBZ Bank, ZB Bank with First Mutual Life. So it's a deep state driven by corruption. But I want to answer your question. How do we reconcile the people's aspirations and an uncaring, unlistening, desensitized a government that suffers from a kwashioka of love for its people? We wrote a book, me and my friends wrote a book a few years ago called Democracy Works. Right. It must function in this country. But democracy can't wait the day of the election in July of 2023. Democracy happens now. Do we have strong institutions? We don't. Look at the way that they've lacerated the constitution of Zimbabwe. Look at the way in which the judiciary is being emasculated. Look at the way in which the law is being, weaponized. Where is Makomborero Aruzivishe, as I'm talking to you right now? Opro Chingon, Job Scala, my own, case, Cecilia Chimbiri, Joanna Mamombe, Netsai Maroa. Just to mention a few, a few. Look at the state of parliament. They've lacerated it by these incessant recalls. Look at the state of our local authorities. How can local authorities be effective when lawfully elected councillors and officials are removed left, right, and center. Look at the mistreatment of Mayor Jacob, Mafumi. So you can't build a state when your key function is to destroy institutions. And democracy can't work and survive when you have weak and non-existent institutions. Two, civic society. Civic society is under attack. Number one, they don't have resources. So most of them are forced to work with government, with parliament, because that's where the resources. Are. So many of them are being forced to compromise. They're attacked by the law. Many directors are arrested. Recently, a director in the office of the resident minister for Harare issued a statement that literally banned NGOs and then to get a court order. So, but my prayer and appeal is that citizens can't outsource the struggle. Citizens can't outsource the struggle. Right. Citizens can't delegate the struggle. We are our own liberators. We are our own liberators. And as Bob Marley once saying, none but ourselves can free ourselves. These people who are governing us, when they look at us, they laugh at us. But they say, but we confronted our system. We confronted Ian Smith. We went to a war of liberation for 25 years. I'm not saying anyone must go to a war. I belong to a movement that is called the Movement for Democratic Change. We believe in peace. We believe in non-violent ways and means of achieving change. And I'll remain loyal to that. But the Constitution allows us the right to voice. Right. The right to protest is contained in Section 59. As long as it's peaceful, it is constitutional. So citizens must stand up for themselves. People must express, because citizens are citizens. Wananchi, Wananchi. Then reforms must take place, Yvonne. We need constitutional reforms now that the Constitution has been lacerated. And speaking for myself, the only constitutional reform you need is to remove all these amendments and go back to the original 2013 Constitution. You then need to harmonize our laws with this Constitution. It's quite a decent Constitution.
But do you see this happening? Do you see this happening?
Not under Emmerson Mnangagwa, not under ZANU-PF. It won't happen. But there are certain things, Yvonne, that don't require money. It doesn't require money to say we are advertising for a television station. Anyone wants to open a television station, show us your money and agree to a code of ethics that you are not going to publish pornography or hate material, and you go ahead. 41 years after independence, we have one television station, an obnoxious one for that matter, called the Zimbabwe Broadcasting Corporation. And every year, it wins awards for best television station. What self-serving nonsense is that? So it pains me, Yvonne, that this conversation I'm having with you, I've had it literally for the past 20 years. Yes. The characters may change, the interviews may change, but the issues remain the same. Other countries are moving forward. Right. Other countries have thrown politics on the side. They are moving forward. Look at the way Zambia is going to sprint with my friend HH. Look at Malawi. Look at Malawi. Look at Botswana. Look at Mauritius. Look at Senegal. Look at Ghana. Zimbabwe is caught up in a time trap that is 41 years old. We are still fighting a war that ended in 1979. That war is not over. So we use the language of delegitimization. The language of legitimacy is, did you participate in the war for the liberation struggle? But we've got millennials. Right. We've got 3-4 generations that have been born after 1980. You can't hold them hostage to your own struggle, because every generation has got its own fight. Right. So your own fight, the struggle for decolonization, we are thankful, we are greatly indebted, but it is not our own struggle. Right. The struggle for our own generation is jobs, it's employment, it's development, it's spaghetti roads, It's
bullet trains.
It's bullet trains.
We have seen the NRZ back
the NRZ, those coaches also belong to a museum. They belong to a museum. How does a government, 41 years after independence, commission train wagons that belong to a museum? It's pathetic, it's shameful, and it's unacceptable.
Zambia President Hichilema came through and everybody was so excited, and suddenly people had this hope that maybe Zimbabwe was coming through. But we see that Zambia and Zimbabwe are different. Zambia has a change of leadership.
That's what they, well, change is coming. Yeah.
Zimbabwe, we've now got the second president. How does Zimbabwe get to achieve this change that we're seeing in other countries?
I think we need citizens' convergence. Citizens' convergence for change. That is long overdue. And the people must rally around the democratic movement led by Advocate Nelson Chamisa. But we need all hands on the deck. We need all Zimbabweans on the deck. Let's see for one moment, just come together in unison with one common vision of achieving democratic change in Zimbabwe and attaining a democratic transition in Zimbabwe. People are suffering. It doesn't matter who you are. It doesn't matter whether you're an army general. It doesn't matter whether you're a policeman. It doesn't matter whether you're a shika driver. It doesn't matter whether you're a school teacher. It doesn't matter whether you are selling tomatoes in 4th Street. It doesn't matter whether you've got 1 hectare of land in Ngai, or you've got 2,000 heads of cattle in Lower Guero. It doesn't matter. People are suffering, and people are savaged. People are ravaged by this permanent state of predatoriness, permanent state of extraction, permanent state of hatred, permanent state of exclusion, permanent state of assault after assault. The crises in Zimbabwe are like waves. They come at you incessantly and non-stop. Every day there's a crisis. Every day there's a crisis. People are exhausted. People are tired. And people just want to grab their own lives, to send their children to school, to live normal lives. That's what people are asking for. The Zimbabwe we want, the Zimbabwe we deserve.
And unfortunately, we have grown a system of individualism as a nation. That's where you see that the police raid vendors, and instead of arresting the vendors, they are taking the wares and consuming them for themselves. They're not even presenting this as evidence in courts and stuff. I've got this question that maybe you can also assist me as a lawyer, because we were talking to vendors in Bare yesterday, and they were saying police, they come, they take our things. These things don't even go to the police station. Instead, they share it amongst themselves. When they come, they don't even advise us that there's something that they are doing and they don't want to see us in certain areas. Vendors are saying we want to be licensed, but no one is licensing us. Instead, they are busy attacking us. In an informal economy such as Zimbabwe, what should relations be like between the vendors and the regulatory, the police and city council police, for example?
People are trying to make a living. People are trying to reproduce themselves. There's no formal employment. 95% of our people are unemployed in the informal sector. So people should be allowed to reproduce themselves. And therefore, the heavy-handedness of the police and the municipal police is both unlawful, unconstitutional, but it's also immoral. And I hope the vendors can get more organized so that they challenge these things in court. They approach the Zimbabwe lawyers for human rights. But here is where some pigs are more equal than others. There is an informal sector which ZANU-PF controls, Makorokoza, for instance. But ZANU-PF allows them to do that. In fact, ZANU-PF chiefs control those Makorokoza, but you don't hear police having raided Makorokoza. In fact, you hear stories of Makorokoza capturing police stations and beating up men. So it's a double standard. There's double standard. Look at the Chinese; they are busy in mountains, in places like Mtoko, Linde, Domboshawa now. Mining left, right, and center. They even have the audacity of saying communal people don't have title.
Right.
Can you imagine a black Zimbabwean going to Shanghai in China and saying you don't have title? All state belongs to the all land belongs to the state.
Yeah.
I've come here to mine. They will kill you. They will kill you. Never mind the police. So we have got a very unfortunate situation. The anger that you see amongst our people, even the behavior of the policemen, countries like households mirror the leadership that they have.
Right.
So if your husband is a bully, beats up people, uses crass language, your own children, Yvonne, will also use that same. Yeah. So if you have a leadership that is cruel, that steals, that is abusive, that doesn't pay attention to detail, that is only concerned about money, power. The ordinary average Zimbabwean as well will reproduce that. And unfortunately, our citizens right now become a mirror image of Emmerson Mnangagwa in this cabinet.
Right.
And that is unfortunate.
We can talk about the problems that Zimbabwe is facing and we'll never come to the end of it. We can never overemphasize the suffering that the people are going through. But maybe as we close this conversation, what should be done?
A very important question, Yvonne. It reminds me of Lenin and the Bolsheviks. In 1901, we had to answer the same question. What is to be done? I think the first thing is that we need to deal with the political mess. We need to deal with the crisis of legitimacy. And in this regard, I think citizens must come together. There has to be citizens' convergence for change. So that is the simple truth. That is the simple, fact. Citizens' convergence for change. Around the democratic movement led by Advocate Nelson Chamisa, but all hands must be on deck. All hands must be on deck. That's number one. We need to resolve the crisis, if possible. I think there are too many deaf people in this country. The dialogue is just essential. The nation loses nothing by dialogue.
We're supposed to talk to who?
Two principal people, Nelson Chamisa and Emmerson Mnangagwa, MDC and ZANU-PF. But there are other important stakeholders. The military is an important stakeholder. Citizens are an important stakeholder. The church is an important stakeholder. The unions are important. The trade unions are an important stakeholder. Women are an important stakeholder. Business is an important stakeholder. So the dialogue shouldn't be elitist. It must be inclusive and it mustn't be selfish.
But Pollard
is not a decent dialogue. You can create a platform for losers to loot and discuss. You can create a platform for hopeless Europeans like Douglas Monsora, Thokozani Kupe, Lucia Mativenga, and others. So we need genuine, dialogue by serious actors. The starting point being MDC, led by Advocate Nelson Chamisa, and ZANU-PF, led by Mr. Mnangagwa. I hesitated a bit because I understand that ZANU was supposed to have its elective Congress in December of 2019. So there may be questions about his legitimacy from a ZANU-PF point of view, but he's still the leader of ZANU-PF. So dialogue is key. In other words, we need to build a united Zimbabwe. To batrana pamberi, to enda umberi. Number three, I think we need to resolve the transitional issues arising in our economy. Number one, the foreign currency, foreign exchange issue. We need to scrap SIF 33 of 2019, SI 142 of 2019, SI 127 of 2021. We need to bring back the regime of multiple currencies. If we're going to maintain the Zimbabwean dollar, then let's liberalize it. Let's float it so that it finds a resting place in the market. Let's remove export surrender requirements. Let's ring-fence in US dollar terms pensions. Let's pay the public service in US dollar terms. Let's attend to genuine reforms around the crippling debt crisis. Let's negotiate a program with the World Bank and the IMF and the African Development Bank for the cancellation of Zimbabwe's debt. Let's deal with our infrastructure, which is decayed. Let's deal with the ease of doing businesses. Let's restore macroeconomic stability through pursuit of prudent, macroeconomic, policies. But most importantly, let's deal with corruption. Corruption is killing this country. Corruption is dealing with this country. Let's build strong institutions. Let's attend to reforms, constitutional reforms, legal reforms, electoral reforms, media reforms. Open up, the airwaves. In short, YVONNE, 60% of our problems are political. So let's deal with the elephant in the living room, which is politics. Then let's deal with the mechanical issues that we can all deal together, perhaps in the National Transitional Authority, the economy, the social services, the infrastructure, the debt, and the social issues. And social issues have suddenly become so big. Things such as child marriages, things such as domestic violence, for instance. There's decay in our societies. There's decay, moral decay in our societies. How do we morally rearm the state? Mental health issues, drugs issues, the problem of drugs. I was in court the other day, court 14. What I saw in that court showed me the abuse of crystal meth by children in this country. Mutoriro, Kuka. I learned language and lexicon that I didn't know. Divorce rates. There's an implosion of divorces in this country, which reflect that there's an underlying crisis in our country. Bohemianism. There's just bohemianism. There's no integrity of the body. There's no integrity of the physical body. We're abusing these bodies as a nation state. So in summary, let's deal with the political problems. Let's deal with the economic problems. Let's deal with the infrastructural, problems. Let's deal with the social services problems. Let's deal with the poverty, the social agenda. Let's deal with the social issues around domestic violence, child marriages, drugs, mental illnesses. In short, let's have a brand new paradigm shift. Let's start from zero to rebuild the Zimbabwe we all deserve for, the Zimbabwe we crave for, a new Zimbabwe, a great Zimbabwe.
Thank you so much, Honorable Biti, for affording us this time to have this conversation.
Thank you, Sikomukonde.
Thank you so much, everyone, for joining us on this conversation. Sometimes when we see these things and they are expressed in the way they are, it kind of casts a dark cloud on everything that is happening. But we know that because we started talking about it, albeit for a long time, we're definitely coming to the end. This is Zimbabwe Daily, and this was Frank Talk with me, YVONNE. Have yourselves a wonderful rest of the day.
What is the cost of restoring versus ignoring the scourge?